the Showa series is probably my favorite era in the Godzilla franchise. But there's 15 films in this era, so I want to focus on the few that I consider to be my personal favorites. First of all is King Kong vs. Godzilla, which is the third film in the series. It features some hilariously bad acting, some overacting from the human characters, but the monster action is top notch, and the Godzilla suit design is among my favorite in the series. Probably in the whole franchise. I love the crocodilian, alligator esque looking design of his face and the bulky dinosaur shape of his body. It's a great start, especially if you have kids. It's also got some pretty good continuity. If you watch this film after watching Godzilla Raids Again, you'll notice that, unlike a lot of Godzilla films, one movie acknowledges the other, the events of the previous film. Godzilla awakens in an iceberg in this movie, and that'll be a callback to the fact that in the last movie, the Japanese military buried Godzilla under tons of ice. So there's a clear continuity connection between Raids Again and this film, so that's one plus for this film. But it is pretty silly, so it may not be for you if you like Godzilla movies that play it straighter. So if you prefer that, the next movie is pretty solid. Mothra vs. Godzilla really, really improves upon the acting from the human characters. The special effects are a lot better. The violence and gore is increased, and the more mature themes of greed and excess are explored a little more maturely in this film. But that said, the kaiju action is pretty awesome. Not as thoroughly fun or as expansive as in Kong vs. Godzilla, but Mothra proves to be a pretty interesting foil to Godzilla. Her pacifist role and the pacifist philosophy behind Mothra and her guardians is kind of an interesting dynamic when pitted against Godzilla. Godzilla is this big titan that just causes death and destruction versus this pacifist creature that really only engages and only causes destruction when she's being threatened. So it's kind of an interesting theme that plays out throughout the film. So Godzilla is really he's always indestructible, but in this film they really play up his invincibility. He's bombed, burned, electrocuted, shot, and he just keeps coming back like Jason or Michael Myers. He's really cool in this movie. But it is, either way, it's objectively the best film of the franchise. Aside from the original 1954 film, Mothra vs. Godzilla is considered among critics and audiences to be the best in the series. So if you're curious what the Godzilla series is about, but you don't know where to start, Mothra vs. Godzilla is mature enough that older audiences can enjoy it, but I think kids could still enjoy it too, although you probably need to sit with them throughout some of the more violent sections of the movie. So check it out. Another favorite of mine is Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, which is an immediate follow-up to Mothra vs. Godzilla. In this film, Godzilla makes the final transition to a hero, or at least an anti-hero, in which he battles the evil space dragon, or I guess Hydra, named King Ghidorah. Ghidorah lands on Earth, starts burning down cities, and Mothra, or at least one of the Mothra, I can't speak English today, one of the Mothra larvae appeal to Godzilla and Rodan, begging them to help her drive Ghidorah off the planet, which ultimately they do. And there's an awesome four-monster melee between Godzilla, Mothra, Rodan versus Ghidorah, which surprisingly takes a while for them to finally get the momentum on Ghidorah, but ultimately they do prevail. It's an awesome fight. It's a little more, in tone, it's a little closer to Kong versus Godzilla, with some of the overacting returning a bit, the weirder plot lines returning. There's a weird spy subplot that I haven't even really brought up, and that's because it's so weird and so convoluted that it's difficult to get through in one quick review. I'm just trying to touch on the basic stuff. But this movie really doubles down the monster action. The monster fights between Godzilla and Rodan are pretty cool. But the better fight is undoubtedly between the three monsters versus Ghidorah. Ghidorah is definitely the Joker to Godzilla's Batman. He is probably the tallest kaiju in the franchise. He's definitely the most powerful. Anytime Ghidorah makes an appearance, it always takes more than one monster to take him down. And this movie is definitely no exception. So, historically, Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, is not only one of my favorites, but historically, it's important because it's the movie that shows Godzilla's transition from villain to hero. So, be sure to check that one out. I want to move on down to the final movie, technically the final movie of the Showa series, called Destroy All Monsters. And before you guys get on me, I know there's about 6 or 7 movies after this one, but Destroy All Monsters takes place in 1999, which is about 20 years or 25 years after Terror of Mechagodzilla. So, in this movie, we have all of the Earth's monsters fighting Ghidorah this time. Unfortunately, there's too many monsters to really give each one of them a lot of time to shine on screen. Mainly, it's Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra, and Anguirus from Godzilla Raids Again, and Gorosaurus that get the most screen time, besides Ghidorah. There's a lot of cool model work, lots of cool rampage sequences. The plot is kind of a retread of Monster Zero, where aliens take control of the Earth monsters and turn them on humanity. But it's a pretty fast-paced movie. Lots of cool sequences to sit through. Whereas some monster movies take some time to get going, this one has the kaiju action sprinkled throughout the movie enough that it always keeps you engaged. So this one is a really solid film to watch. I don't know if it's the best of the final Godzilla films, but it's definitely it would have been a good final bow for the monsters if Toho stopped it here. However, they kept going. The movies got cheaper and cheaper. Budgets got slashed. Model work got shoddier. The effects budget went down. Quality of the films went down. They're still enjoyable, but I want to focus on the ones that actually stand out in the back end of the Showa series, and that is Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, where Godzilla takes on his Titan counterpart for the first time in the series. Mechagodzilla, in this particular movie, Mechagodzilla, who in other versions, other Godzilla films, is usually portrayed as either a military weapon by the Japanese military or is a weapon used by corporate thugs, like in Godzilla vs. Kong, the 2021 film. In this one, he is a tool used by aliens. He is still a military weapon, but he's a weapon built by aliens. Mechagodzilla, besides King Ghidorah, is probably the coolest and most powerful kaiju. He shoots missiles and lasers and bombs out of every nook and cranny in his body. He turns Godzilla into a bloodbath. He beats the crap out of a lion dog kaiju called King Caesar. He literally, there's a scene where Mechagodzilla is just unloading all of his weapons on the two of the monsters, and it looks like a huge 4th of July celebration with just bombs and explosions all over the set. It is so cool. The human characters are okay. The alien subplot, the subplot about the aliens using Mechagodzilla as their weapon is a bit of a, well, it's again a retread of Monster Zero and Destroy All Monsters and Godzilla vs. Gigan. It's just that the monster effects are a lot better. The action sequences are a lot better. The overall look and aesthetic of the movie is a lot better than the previous 4 or 5 films. It's just a lot of fun. It's a really strange movie involving fantasy and prophecies, but also involving aliens from outer space. A lot of themes and lots of weird genre mashups that don't really make a lot of sense, but the insanity is a part of the charm. So just enjoy it and roll with it. The final film, literally the final film of the Showa series, Terror of Mechagodzilla, is a great send-off in that, one, it again brings back Mechagodzilla, but it also re-injects the dark and serious, more somber tone of the early films, with director Ishiro Honda returning to the director's chair, and several, it seems like several, I can't really name them, but there was a few other folks that returned to Toho from earlier in the franchise as well. But don't quote me on that. Either way, the movie scales back on the fantasy element compared to the last film. The goofy insanity aspect is also toned down. The movie is given a more dramatic, tragic angle, with the mad scientist in the film having a tragic backstory. Nobody really plays it for laughs in this movie, which I guess is okay, but after seeing a lot of Godzilla films that are targeted towards kids, it's kind of a jarring change of pace or a change of tone. But the movie also introduces a new monster that we never see again, strangely enough, called Titanosaurus, which is controlled by the mad scientist who has allied himself with the aliens. Titanosaurus and Mechagodzilla are partners in crime, so to speak. This time Godzilla has to go up against 2 bad guys, whereas Godzilla usually has a hero or has an ally to fight with him. This time he has no Anguirus or Mothra or Rodan. It's just him in the Japanese military versus Titanosaurus and Mechagodzilla. And for a little bit, it ebbs and flows. Godzilla is surprisingly, or not surprisingly, way more powerful than Titanosaurus, who really is just an aquatic lizard that can make heavy winds with his tail. That's just about it. But when combined, I mean, every time Godzilla gets the upper hand, Mechagodzilla just steps in and burns the crap out of him with his lasers and his missiles. So it's not really a fair fight. But eventually the tide turns and Godzilla emerges victorious, and the movie ends with him going out into the ocean. So it's nice to see the old crew from the early films come back to direct this last movie. It's in some ways it's nice to see a Godzilla film this late in the Showa series embrace the darker stuff and embrace the darker visuals and themes and characters. It's sometimes, though, it's a bit of a letdown, because by this time you get used to the zaniness and the over-the-top special effects, and this movie tries to rein that in a little bit. So, but it's still an enjoyable movie, and I would definitely recommend it, especially if you're into kaiju films. Although I would only recommend you see this if you've seen other Godzilla movies that are a little more accessible, like Godzilla versus Mothra or the original Godzilla from 1954. Give it a little time before you see this one, just to get yourself acquainted with the aesthetic of these movies and the tone and all that stuff. Not to say this is a bad one. This is definitely a solid film. So if you're a kaiju fan, check it out.